Hello, universe, and you. It is Tuesday, almost 3:30 in the afternoon. I'm doing this one a little bit late. We've had technical difficulties the last two Tuesdays trying to do this, so there's no guarantee it's going to work out the way we hope. But we had a pastor's day out for lunch, and that was an important sit-down meeting as we talked about where we're at as a church, what we think is the next phase, especially with fall starting up. So we had a great time. It's very hot out. But that means I didn't get any time at my desk until right now. So I know most of you watch this after and not during. So hopefully this will work. Or maybe you normally watch it after when it's live at 1. You watch it after, which is 3:30, which would mean you could watch it live now. So many options. Anyway, I'm Jeff, and I want to talk about what happened on Sunday. And hopefully YouTube will cooperate. The feed will cooperate. I won't get all pixelated and frozen like I did last week. But if I do, I probably won't know because it looks great to me. Well, except for the guy in the middle of the camera shot. But anyway, here we go. It is August 2nd. 2 days ago, we had our Super Sunday outdoor picnic, fun extravaganza cavalcade of whimsy. It was a good time. But I want to talk a lot about it because there's a lot more I wanted to say about the content of the message and kind of what it's like doing half a sermon and then having that be translated so it kind of comes out as quarter of a sermon. Those are unique. I want to talk a little bit about the experience of doing that. Dig in deeper to John chapter 1. But I want to start by saying, personally, I thought it was a tremendous success. I thought it was a wonderful day. If you were here, you know what the experience was like. We had a tent with a lot of chairs under it. And when I arrived, I said to Gino, I said, wow, you're looking kind of optimistic with the number of chairs here. Well, sure enough, we didn't have enough chairs. People were sitting outside the tent on their own chairs or under their own tents. It was quite well attended. It was packed. It was a great time. And the weather cooperated. It really wasn't too hot. It was a nice summer day with a little bit of a breeze. So the service was fun. The food was great. The snack part of the food. So the way it worked, if you weren't here, we started at 9:30. We had a service, regular worship service with regular music. When I say regular, I mean it would have been the same service indoors as it was outdoors. So we had a couple songs. We had Pastor James was our elder of the week, so he did announcements and prayer time, and then Ali and I preached the sermon, then we closed with other songs and, church service for us. But we were, of course, 3 services in one. We had our 8:15, 10:30, and Grace Latino all together, which is always fun. And I'm not sure, it would have been really close, but I'm not sure we could have fit everybody in the sanctuary that was here on Sunday outdoors. So it was a good choice to do it outdoors. If we grow much more, we certainly won't be able to fit in the sanctuary to do this in one service, which is a great problem to have. But that's another thing that made it special to be outside. And then following that, we had Gino let us in a couple icebreakers and games and get to know you things. And Grace Latino had set up kind of a snack area with all sorts of amazing food, horchata to drink, and a salsa bar. And the one that said hot red salsa, I heard from people who didn't believe it, and then they believed it. It was hot. It was great. I enjoyed it a lot. And then we had a lunch line. We got some chicken that the church provided, and then people provided sides, and it was just a wonderful time. And we had a dunk tank and a foam pit and a big slide, and we had octoball or gaga ball, whatever they call that there, for the kiddos, for the teenagers and the youth. We had a ping pong table out. We had volleyball going on. We had cornhole going on. It was great. It was just an awesome, awesome day. And as one who got to be in the dunk tank, it was great. I got to tell you, I've always wanted to be in a dunk tank. And it was great to, it's hard to explain. It was cold, but it was so much fun being dunked, especially by the little kids, who could barely throw it. But it's amazing. Like, people I did not expect to dunk me got me good. And it just made me laugh all afternoon. Had a great time. So I know there's footage and pictures out there. We'll probably show them around sometime. But it was a good time. The thing, though, for me, some of you know this about me. In my 20s, I served at large churches. So the church I started with my youth pastor when I was 19. When I say I started, there was 12 of us that met in a apartment clubhouse to pray about this church thing. I was 18 when, almost 19 when we started doing that. And then by the time I was 21, I was leading worship on Sundays for 2,000 people in that church. So it was like immediate. I go from, I'm a freshman in college hanging out with my youth pastor to I'm a part of a multi-staff environment at a megachurch in the suburbs of Chicago. And so I was there until 25, 26, where I came out to Aurora, where I was an associate pastor at a church of about 700 when I got there. 4 years later, when I left, we were also in the 2,000 to 2,500 range. I did my internship at a church where we did 5 Sunday services a week, probably 3,000 to 4,000. I was only there 6 months, but anyway, my 20s, that was my experience of church. Now, I grew up a pastor's kid in an evangelical free church, very much like Grace, in the Chicago suburbs. Of course, I was born here, so I remember Grace from the 70s, but like I grew up in your standard suburban 200 to 300 person church. And then in my 20s, I went to these mega churches where I was a role player on a team. And then in my 30s, I was a struggling church planter. I thought, well, what I did with my youth pastor 10 years previous, of course, it's going to work now. And so right around when I turned 30, Abby and I and our family, we planted a church in Aurora. And it was the exact opposite of an experience that I had had in Chicago, in the sense of attracting people to come or building it up or having enough money to live. Of course, the Lord took great care of us through all that. And by the time we had left after 7 years, we had gotten it up to about 200 people. Now, numbers are not the point. The point I'm trying to make is the different ways church happens in relative sizes. And I've seen both sides. I've seen all the extremes. I've seen the big ones, the tiny ones, and everything in between. And church health is not always related to size. And sometimes the bigger it is, maybe the less healthy it can be. In fact, do you know the thing that grows in your body the fastest is cancer? If you have it. I hope you don't have it. But nothing grows as fast as cancer in the human body. So just because something grows big very quickly doesn't mean it's healthy, I guess is the point. But healthy things do grow and healthy things reproduce. And so here at Grace Church, we want to have that energy towards continuing to bring people in to hear the gospel and then multiplying when we're too big to fit in this facility in this area. Because the goal isn't to be the biggest church in town. The goal is to be a meaningful thing to someone in town and to be a blessing in our city. And so growing and multiplying is still part of it. All of that is background noise to say this. Sundays like we just had, before it happened, give me the shakes. Outdoor big gathering days, I kind of have a PTSD about, because when we were church planting, it totally worked. The church I was at was called the Chapel, and we called them Chapel Fests. And we would have Chapel Fests in the summer as just kind of at that time in a high school gym. And so we'd go to the field across the street, and everybody would bring picnics, and we'd set up a stage and have a band, and it would just be the church family picnic. And it went really well, except the year that we played pickup football. It was touch football. I played quarterback, and I threw a pass to a guy who came down on top of someone else's foot. When he caught it in the end zone, he came down on top of somebody else's foot, and his foot turned 90 degrees the wrong way. Ambulance, the whole bit. It was, even if you're not averse to like blood or anything like that, this still would turn your stomach a little bit. He turned out to be okay after like 2 years of therapy. I imagine physical therapy. I don't know about mental health therapy, which I talked about last week. Always a good idea as well. Anyhow, so that was one of those events where like this great event turned south in a hurry. And then it was like, what are we doing? So obviously we never played football after those Chapel Fests, at other Chapel Fests after that one. Anyway, then when we were starting in Aurora and we're trying to let the community know we exist, we would do our church down there. It's called Harvest Community Church. And so we'd have Harvest Fests. And we would do these a couple times a year in August or in October, because Harvest Fest makes sense as like an October event, right? You get the hay rides and all that stuff. But we would do them in the summer as well. And we would we had tents with face painting and water balloon fights and the jumpy castles. And the whole thing was to let the community know we exist, because we were meeting in a high school theater. And so we would go out into the field outside the high school and we would put on this big show and we'd advertise it for weeks ahead of time. And we must have done half a dozen of these, probably more than that, maybe 10. Every single one was stand in the parking lot and pray your guts out that any of those cars is going to turn in for the thing. And some were great, but most were like tumbleweeds. People didn't come. And I don't know what the difference was, if it was difference in between kind of blue collar Chicago area and more of the Colorado, if it's nice, we go camping in the mountains kind of balance, or if it was a change in attitudes towards churches from 1993, 94 to 2004, 2005. But for some reason, they just didn't work. And we put in so much time and so much effort and so much energy into it. And so in the weeks leading up to our Super Sunday that we just had on Sunday, I'm seeing it all happen again. I'm having flashbacks to what it takes. You know, the 2-hour meetings about how big of a tent should we have, where the chair is going to come from, what if it rains, do we really want a dunk tank, how are we going to do this, where's it going to set up, what about, is it going to be too hot? And I'm having flashbacks and I'm like, I don't like this. I got high maintenance, I got PTSD, especially when it comes to high maintenance events outdoors. And I wanted to tell you that backstory because in all those meetings, I didn't say much because I didn't want to thwart the good that was happening by being, the party pooper. But I just was kind of sitting there like, here we go again. And when I arrived on Sunday morning, got here, the chairs were mostly set up at that point. They were working on some stage and some tech things. But there's maybe 20 people at that point kind of getting the final thing set up. And I just had those flashbacks like, this is a lot of work. Is there going to be any impact here? Is this worth doing? So many things outside of our control, like the weather. And so I don't typically get pessimistic ever. I'm crazy optimistic guy. I think I have the spiritual gift of faith. But these types of things, I go back and I get that post-traumatic stress of, I've done this so many times and it's not worked. I hope it works this time. So when it worked the way it worked, I was so overjoyed. And my favorite part of the whole thing is that I didn't have to do much at all. And I don't say that because I'm lazy. I say that because I needed to see this win and work to be comfortable with this idea of doing these things. So to whoever helped, I know Ali and Grace Latino did a ton of stuff. I know Dottie and our hospitality ladies did a ton of stuff. I know the elders did a ton of stuff. I know Gino and Carla here in the office did a ton of the detail chasing. I know James worked like crazy to get all the kids stuff and the kids packets and everything working well. I know the tech team had to solve like 100 different things to be able to have microphones out there. And I'm just so grateful to be a part of a team that pulled that off. I'm overjoyed and proud and thankful. And that's why when I did finally get a turn to be a part of what was happening, which was when I got up to preach and they handed me a microphone, I said, before I say anything, we have to say thank you to the people that made that happen. So I'm going to give it to you from my crazy wired brain. My sweet spot of ministry, what I'm aiming for all the time, and I'll explain in a minute, is I want you to picture like a graph. You have an x-axis and a y-axis, or x-axis, y-axis. Your y-axis is maintenance, and your x-axis is impact. Now, a lot of what happens in big church events, think like Christmas orchestra concert. We're going to do Handel's Messiah with a full choir and a full orchestra, or the big Christmas pageant, or a big blowout Easter where you do things you'd never do on any other Sunday. That's where you go. You want the high maintenance. You go maintenance high because it's worth doing something big. We used to do musicals here. We did Sound of Music. We did The King and I. They did Scrooged before I came. I don't remember if there was Jesus Christ Superstar. Maybe. I don't remember. But those things were off the charts high maintenance. The amount of rehearsal time you have to do, the amount of decor you have to do, the amount of promotion you have to do, blocking, tech rehearsal, figuring out mics, like costuming. It was massive undertaking. And the people who did it loved it. And I enjoyed the ones I saw, Sound of Music and King and I thought they did great. But those are high maintenance. And it's very hard to measure impact of that, because what is the end goal? Is it to get people to come to church? Is it to put on a show? Is it to get kind of a presence in the drama community in Longmont and surrounding areas, that we're a place where those people can come and be welcome? It could be a lot of different things, but how do you measure that kind of impact? And when you factor in financial costs and things like that. So that's an example of something that could be high maintenance, but you're not sure what the impact is. You hope it's high impact. And again, I think Sound of Music certainly was high impact for us. King and I, not so sure. But I'm only judging that by the emails I got. So I might be the worst judge in the world to do that. But on any given Sunday, we're working that graph, because high maintenance does not always result in higher impact. In fact, sometimes if you can get the highest impact with the lowest maintenance, that's a beautiful place to be. To wit, Good Friday services. Good Friday, it's going to be high impact unless you screw it up. So unless you mess it up, people come to Good Friday, they know what they're here for, they know what they want to think about, they know what they want to deal with in their souls. So what you do, strip back the music. It's not time for a concert. It's Good Friday. You pull out all the cross songs you know of, maybe even some blood songs. Those are always good. You take communion. You do a message about Gethsemane or Barabbas or anything from Passion Week. You don't have to swing too hard, to totally mix my metaphors here. You don't have to swing for a home run to get a home run on Good Friday. Christmas Eve, similarly. Christmas Eve, people know why they're coming to a Christmas Eve service. They want to hear about the Nativity. They want to sing Hark the Herald Angels Sing. They want to have candles where you sing Silent Night. So do it. You win 0 points as a pastor by trying to trick people on those types of services. And again, the whole point of these breakdowns, again, is to give this my perspective, the pastor's perspective on this stuff. So I'm not saying anything about what you might hope for or would like to do on any of these services. I'm just saying from the pastor's perspective, after having done 25 years of these or more, certain services, you have that perfect match of low maintenance, high impact, always gold. But sometimes higher maintenance is totally worth it to provide impact you wouldn't get otherwise, like an outdoor picnic service. Super high maintenance, but if you're here Sunday, that was pretty high impact. That was a big success, a big win. And other times you go full high maintenance and you don't get the same impact. The graph goes backwards. You get higher maintenance, but you get lower impact. And that's when people get burned out. That's when people are like, they have to talk themselves into trying to do it again the next time. Was it really worth it? You have those kind of questions. But you could also sit at the low maintenance side and have 0 impact as well. I mean, you have to show up and play ball. So again, back to the baseball, you still have to get into the batter's box and swing. So just kind of sitting on your hands and being like, well, we're a church. If people want to come, they'll come. Okay, that's low maintenance, but 0 impact. So you're trying to find that sweet spot on that graph between maintenance and impact. And you say, well, how do you measure impact? Well, that's more of an art than a science. because it doesn't necessarily mean number of people who showed up, but sometimes it means more than 0 showed up. And so I think about that a lot, that maintenance versus impact curve. And I think about that on our Sundays. I think about that on our Easters. I think about that on our Christmases, events like this. And for someone who's generally not high maintenance and doesn't really enjoy high maintenance stuff, big plans and tons of details, this was amazing. And I'm super glad that the people who love maintenance did such a great job at it. So that's the long and short of it. And your philosophy of ministry for the week. The other piece I want to talk about was the actual content of the message, John chapter 1. And it looks like I have about 10 minutes left to cover that. So the next, coming up, what we have left in 2 Corinthians is kind of the wind down of the book, where Paul starts to name names and it gets kind of personal. And it's really good stuff. But for a big kind of outdoor party service, which is kind of what it was with everybody, it's a little inside baseball. It's a little like home crowd kind of stuff. And we thought, if we're going out there, let's do something a little more center lane, evangelism, basics kind of thing. So we had just done the 2 chapters on false teachers, or the 2 sermons on false teachers from chapter 10 and a little bit of 11. And the gospel, if you don't believe a different spirit or a different gospel or a different Jesus than the one we gave you. That's what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 10. So we thought, well, let's do the real Jesus then. And the best place to find that is John chapter 1. And so we mapped out, Ali and I mapped out the groups of 2 that are in that chapter. So that at the beginning, he's fully God. John is making the case of the divinity of Christ. But then he took on flesh and dwelt among us in verse 14. So that's the fully human. Okay, so he's fully God and fully human. But then in him was light, and this light was life. Light and life. That's a pair of things. I got a fly around here. And then the truth and grace, which is the biggie there at the end of that passage. But then, of course, smack in the middle of the whole passage is verse 12. He came to his own, but his own rejected him. But to as many as did receive him, to them he gave the authority to be called children of God, not born of the will of man or of flesh or blood, but of the will of God. So that seemed to be, I'm going to get this guy. Nope. One of the names of Satan is Beelzebub, which means Lord of the Flies. Is he trying to interrupt me? Probably not. I think it's just a fly. Anyway, so we thought we need to end with that. You need to receive him to become a child of God. And Ali is an evangelist. I don't know if you knew this. He's got that evangelistic blood. He's just, and it's boiling up within him whenever he preaches. So I thought, I want to see him do the call to salvation. So I said, I'll do the fully God, fully man. You do the light and life. I'll do the truth and grace. You do the call. And that's how we organized it. But the thing with doing those sermons, those tag teams, like I've done now, 4 or 5 with Ali. John did the last one. But there's the, you're writing half a sermon, right? That's the idea, because you're sharing the time with someone else. But I'm coming to learn even half a sermon is too long. I'm really writing a quarter of a sermon, because my half is also being translated. So there was a lot more about fully God, fully man I wanted to say, but just didn't have time. There's a lot more about truth and grace I wanted to say, but didn't have time. So I'm going to say it now. So the fully God, fully man, I think we all hopefully are grasping that. But really the truth is every heresy throughout Christian history starts there, which is why it's so important to get both always, fully God and fully man. And everything that made him divine, omniscience, omnipresence, omnipotence, he had when he was on earth. He used it selectively, but he still had it. We had a situation, an occasion recently where one of our worship leaders was trying to say, we praise you, Jesus, because you humbled yourself when you came to earth and died for us. And tried to quote the Philippians. Did I get him? I got him. Ha ha ha. Take that, Beelzebub, in your face. Anyway, where was I? Oh, we had a worship leader who was trying to reference Christ's humility, and reference to Philippians passage about he didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the nature of a servant, became obedient to death, even death on a cross. But the way it came out of their mouth was, now I'm not going to remember the exact wording, but it was something like, you left your divinity behind when you came here, was the way it came out. And I had to talk to him after the service, and I'm like, don't say that. He didn't leave his divinity behind at all. He didn't consider equality with God something to be grasped, but took on the nature of a servant. But he stayed fully divine. He didn't leave that in heaven. He just took on full humanity at the same time. So there's certain passages like, he felt power come out of him. So he said, who touched me? Or he says, I don't know the day or the hour. Only the Father knows that. There are times where his omniscience seemed to be limited, but that was self-limiting. That wasn't that he wasn't capable of knowing. In fact, he told Nathanael, he said, yeah, I saw you under the tree. And Nathanael's like, no one was around. Jesus is like, yeah, I'm kind of omniscient. I know everything. He always knew what was in the hearts of the people around him. So the divinity it was still there. And his humanity is still there now, that he's at the right hand of the throne of God. He just has a resurrected human body, which no one else has seen that before. But you'll get one someday, and I'll get one someday, and that'll be great. And the fully God, fully man is super important because only God, you probably have heard this before, but if you haven't, it's worth hearing now. Only God could pay the penalty for sin against God. Because the nature of the penalty is dependent, is consistent with, scales with the nature of the person offended. And you're talking about an infinite being who's offended by sin. So the nature of that penalty is infinite. So a human can't pay for a sin against God. Only God can pay for a sin against God. So it has to be someone who's fully God to pay the penalty for sin. But it has to be somebody fully human because the sin is from humans. And so somebody has to represent humanity, and only a human can represent humanity. So a human can't pay for the full punishment to an infinite being, but a non-human can't represent humanity. So in order for this penalty to be paid, the savior, the payer, the atoner has to be fully God and fully man. How in the world is that ever going to happen? Well, it happened. And that's why we celebrate Jesus, because he is that. He is both. The other thing I didn't really get time for was the truth and grace piece, especially connecting it back to the Exodus 34 passage. I kind of started down that path, but then I got passionate about other stuff. So in Exodus 34 is when Moses sees the wake of the glory of God, but the glory of God is revealed through how God talks about himself. I am the Lord who is full of mercy, but who is also righteous in judgment. I mean, with much better language, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but Exodus 34, the words of God about himself, essentially can be summarized in full of grace and truth, full of mercy and righteous judgment. And those two things mark the glory of God. That's what Moses asked to see, and that's what God told him. I'm full of grace, I'm full of truth. So when John is writing in John chapter 1, he came to us full of grace and truth, I think. And this commentary back here in John also says, John is absolutely referencing Exodus 34 when he says Jesus is full of truth and grace. Because to his initial audience, the glory of God, which is the context even of John's, we have seen, nobody's seen the Father, but the Son has made him known, and we have beheld his glory passing as full of truth and grace. Moses said, what's your glory? Truth and grace. John says, we saw his glory because we saw truth and grace. And it's not the unseeable Father anymore, and it's not just a concept of truth and grace. That glory is actually in a person. It's not just conceptual, it's Jesus. Jesus is full of grace and truth. He is the glory of God manifest for us so that we can interact with him, so that we can be a part of experiencing that glory and being transformed by that glory. And that idea that you have to have truth for grace to mean anything, is one I'm going to dig into many, many more times in my preaching. Heaven doesn't mean anything if there isn't hell. Grace doesn't mean anything if there isn't truth. But if you just stop at truth, then none of us has any hope. But the truth, which is followed then by the mercy and grace of a merciful and gracious God, who forgives the iniquities that he could very much in his righteousness hold to the third, fourth, fifth generation, but he forgives them as far as east is from the west. Now that grace means something because we understand what we do deserve. And I was trying to get that out in the sermon. I don't know how effectively I did. But if grace is getting what we don't deserve, unmerited favor with God, that only means something if we truly understand the truth of what we do deserve. And then it transforms us. And then we realize, okay, I can't but help to worship and give thanks. But if grace is just, well, God's a nice guy, and we don't deal with the truth of his holiness, or we don't deal with the truth of what that grace costs him, he's just a nice guy and wants you to live your fullest life however you choose to do that, then that grace is worthless, or as Dietrich Bonhoeffer would call it, cheap. And the grace of God is not cheap because it comes with the truth of God and the truth of us and the truth of this universe and the truth of our fallenness and the truth of God's righteousness. And then the gift of his righteousness to us who believe, to as many as received him, who believed on his name, they then have the authority and the right to be called children of God. Because through that belief, there's this transaction of truth and grace. His righteousness for our sin, imputed to us, handed to him. And I said this in a closing prayer a couple weeks ago, and somebody came up and said, it blew their mind. I didn't say it first. Jonathan Edwards said it first, but I think it's exactly right. And it's the phrase, the only thing we bring to our salvation is the sin that makes it necessary. Something like that. And I think that's exactly true because it's that mix of truth and grace. And so who is Jesus? He is the embodiment of the glory of God, which means he is full of truth and grace. And when we live our lives from the perspective of truth and grace in how we treat others and how we think about our own walks with the Lord and how we raise our kids and how we treat our parents, truth and grace in our relationships, that is glorious to God because it is the glory of God lived out, truth and grace. And that's what comes out of Exodus 34 as God introduces himself to Moses. He introduces himself to Moses. After Moses said, I want to see your glory, that's what he got. So that's John 1. I didn't even get into light and life. That was Ali's, but man, light and life are John's probably two favorite illustrations throughout his gospel and his three letters. If you just go through the Gospel of John and the letter of 1 John and circle every time you see the word light, you'll have a pretty robust Bible study. Jesus calls himself the light of the world in John chapter 8. In John chapter 3, he's talking to Nicodemus, and he talks about the light has come, but the world hates the light. They love the darkness because their deeds are evil, which is kind of like when you turn the light on, you can either clean up the room or try and turn the light off. And Jesus is telling Nicodemus, most people are going to want the light off. He's like, I'm the light of the world, and I'm here, and I'm shining into things, and you have to deal with that now. The church is the light on the hill that can't be darkened. So, and then what Ali preached, which I thought was great, was connecting it to 1 John, where he said, if you are in the light, then walk in the light, and then you can have fellowship with one another. Because the light has come into the world, and darkness has not overcome it. Which you've heard me say this before. When light and darkness meet, it's never a tie. Light always wins. Yeah, they're not equal and opposite. Darkness is the absence of light. When light shows up, it wins. So that's the story of Jesus. That's the story of Christianity. That's the story of salvation. And it's 35 minutes. And I hope this whole thing made it through without any glitches, without any camera issues. And that's the end of my Tuesday breakdown. This Thursday, 2 days from now, we'll have a regular Thursday update. I'll be back next Tuesday with another one of these. So see you Sunday if I don't see you before, and I hope to see you Sunday. If you're watching this now, you're awesome. If you're watching this later, you're awesome. If you never watch it, you're also awesome. And I hope one day to tell you. Thanks.